Good day, everyone. I am Wafa Utu, and I am the first reporter for our subject, Literary Criticism. My report is about Lesson 2, Classical Literary Theory. Before we proceed to the main content of my lesson, let us first know the learning outcomes. At the end of the lesson, students are expected to A. Explain literary theories and approaches. B. Familiarize the focus and functions of classical theory in criticizing literary pieces. And C. Interpret a poem titled The Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen. The first question is, what is literature? Literature derived from the Latin word literature meaning writing form with letters. Literature is any collection of written work, but it is also used more narrowly for writing specifically considered to be an art form, especially prose fiction, drama, and poetry. In literature, it can be a fiction or non-fiction. Now let us define the term criticism. Criticism is often understood as the act of finding fault, censure, or disapproval. The act of criticizing, especially adversely, but in this course or in this subject, it signifies that criticism is the act of analyzing, interpreting, and making judgments of individual and comparative work of works of art such as literature. What is classical literary theory? Classical literary theory existed as far back as 14th century before Christ. Religious texts are the focus of literary criticism during this time period. It is based on the notion that literature is a representation of life. To get the best idea of what literary theory and criticism started, we turn to the people who influenced its beginning: Plato and Aristotle from Greece, and Horace and Longinus from Rome. So these are the following who lead and introduce the classical literary theory. Plato, born on 428 or 427 before Christ era from Athens or Greece, died on 348 and 347 from Athens. He is an ancient Greek philosopher, student of Socrates, teacher of Aristotle, and founder of the Academy, and best known as the author of philosophical works of unparalleled influence. Aristotle is born on 384 before Christ era from Stygia, Chalcidice, Greece, and died on 322 Chalcis, Euboea. He is an ancient Greek philosopher and scientist and one of the greatest intellectual figures of Western history. He is the author of philosophical and scientific system that became the framework and vehicle for both Christian scholasticism and medieval Islamic philosophy. Even after the intellectual revolution of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment, Aristotelian concepts remain embedded in Western thinking. The third one, Quintus Horatius Flaccus, a classical Latin. He is known in the English-speaking world as Horace, the leading Roman lyric poet during the time of Augustus, or also known as Octavian. The rhetorician Quintilian regarded his odes as just about the only really Latin lyric worth reading. He can be lofty sometimes, yet he is also full of charm and grace, versatile in his figures, and felicitously daring in his choice of words. Lastly, he is Cassius Longinus. He was a Greek rhetorician and philosophical critic, born in either Emesa or Athens. He studied at Alexandria under Ammonius Saccas and Origen the Pagan, and taught for 30 years in Athens, and one of his pupils being Porphyry. Now let's move on to the classical literary theories. This theory is premised on the idea that literature is an imitation of life. It is interested in looking at the literature based on the first one is mimesis. Mimesis is the Greek word for imitation. We try to see whether a piece of literary work shows imitation of life or reality as we know it. If it is, what is imitated? How is the imitation done? It is good or bad imitation. Mimesis, according to the theory of Plato, in his theory of mimesis, Plato says that or claims that art is imitated by nature, an imitation of life. He says that the idea is the reality. Thus, imitation of reality is the art of imitating the idea. He thinks that philosophy is more important than poetry because philosophy deals with ideas, whereas poetry deals with illusion. For Plato, the poet's imitation is removed from the reality twice, so their creation are unreal and illusion of truth. Poetry is mimetic as philosophy is, but Plato denies poetry because it is only mimetic in philosophical and moral grounds, meaning that imitation of poetry can make the best man feel good, sad, sorrowful, and depressed. Some can say that it is normal, but in those times, the stated feelings were feminine and were not appropriate for men being sentimental. Also, Plato says that poets can depict the goods in an appropriate way. Another one is function of Horace. Function refers to whether an art or a piece of literary works aims to entertain or dull, or to teach or to instruct, or util. In this theory of Horace, his main contribution to the traditions of literary theory we are exploring lie in his articulation of the purpose of poetry or literature in general. It is dulce et utile, or sweet and useful. Horace insists that literature serves the didactic purpose which had been Plato's main concern, and that it provides pleasure. The two goals are not compatible as Plato had feared. Poetry is a useful teaching tool. Horace argues precisely because it is pleasurable. The pleasure of poetry makes it popular and accessible, and its lesson thus can be widely learned. Like Plato, Horace sees nature as the primary source for poetry, but he argues that poets should imitate other authors as well as imitating nature. Horace thus establishes the importance of poets knowing literary traditions and respecting inherited forms and conventions, as well as creating new works. The next one is a theory of Longinus, Longinus' theory is about the writing style or style. Style refers to whether a literary work is written in a low, middle, or high style. Longinus even suggested a fourth style which he called the sublime. In this sublime, the five sources he mentioned for the sublime are either related to the author or poem. Longinus defines sublime as kind of loftiness and excellence in language, raising the style of the ordinary language. And the five sources he mentions on the sublimes are: first, power of forming great conceptions. Accordingly, it is concerned with the grandeur of thought in writers, and it is first essential source of sublime. Lofty and natural expression is possible when there are noble and lofty thoughts. Second is the vehement and inspired passion. The second source of sublime is the genuine emotion. The emotion should be strong and naturally expressed in lofty and elevated language so that it can move the readers with pleasure and persuasion. It should match with the grandeur of subject, thought, and lofty style. This third source of sublime is the poetic use of language, or the due formation and use of figure of speech. The formation and use of figures boost the elevated expression if they are properly used. In other words, the use of figures must be physical and intimately contented with thoughts and emotions. The fourth one is the noble diction. The fourth source of sublime is diction that includes choice and arrangement of words. Longinus says that the use of proper and striking words are ethereal or hold attention to the hearers. The words to him should be able corresponding to the subject matter and emotion, so as to impart grandeur and beauty, giving breath into the dead things. The last one is the fifth one is the dignified and elevated composition. That source of sublime is the dignified, elevated arrangement of the diction for the grandeur of composition. The verbal order should be rhythmic and harmonious, which helps pull off persuasion and pleasure, such as composition appeals to the souls and enables the readers to participate in the emotion of their author. So the style or the theory of Longinus is more focused on the writing style of the author. Next is the catharsis of Aristotle. Catharsis refers to the purgation, purification, clarification, or structural kind of emotional cleansing. Aristotle's view of catharsis involves purging of negative emotions like pity and fear. A cathartic or catharsis experience, whether in theater or literature, is an experience which the audience or the reader experiences the same emotion that the characters are experiencing on stage or on the page. It follows then that a cathartic work or catharsis work is any work of literature that gives reader this experience. For example, a book about a young boy who loses his mother to cancer. Such book might not be cathartic for everyone, but for someone who has lost a friend or family member to cancer, reading such a book may be an extremely emotional experience. In this sense, that such reader may find themselves feeling the character's grief or anger as though it were their own. These examples serve to highlight an important part of what makes a work of literature cathartic. The reader must have developed a strong identification with the characters. Or in other words, if readers aren't able to see themselves in the characters, if they feel they don't have any qualities or experience in common, then they probably won't achieve the level of emotional investment necessary to have a cathartic experiences in response to the work. Because of this, it generally takes a great of works ideal of skill and experience on the part of the author to produce a truly cathartic piece of literature. And lastly is the censorship by Plato. Censorship is an issue for Plato for literary works that show bad mimesis. Literary works that show bad mimesis should be censored according to Plato. So in his famous volume, The Republic, Plato sets out a vision for his ideal state. Plato was particularly interested in education and the arts on public display. His argument was that this thing must be rigidly controlled and censored, lest people get evil ideas and thus degraded the body politic. For him, for a state to be good, it must have good citizens, and all good citizens are those who wish to be worthy and good. In other words, Plato wants to convey that only those works of literature that shows good imitation can be shown to young people, and reject those literary work that shows bad imitation. And that's all for my report. Thank you.